Onanga-Anyanga, who is the Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General for the Horn of Africa. We're delighted that Parfait has been able to join us today at what is a particularly busy and challenging time for him. This is the 7th in the IIEA's Development Matters series, which is sponsored by Irish Aid. Parfait Onanga-Anyanga has been the Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa since March of last year. Before that, he fulfilled various UN roles, including that of SRSG and head of the UN mission in the Central African Republic. He was also the coordinator for the UN headquarters response to the Boko Haram crisis. And he was the head of the UN office in Burundi. At an earlier stage, he was the director of office for the UN Deputy Secretary General, and other earlier roles included a period spent at the Preparatory Commission of the CTPTO, and prior to that, he was a diplomat in Gabon's mission to the UN in New York. The Special Envoy will speak to us for about 20 minutes, and then we will have the usual question and answer session. You can join using the Q&A function on Zoom, which you will see on your screen. Please feel free to send in questions throughout the session as they occur to you, and we will come to them, or to as many as possible of them, during the Q&A session. You can join the discussion on Twitter using the handle @IIEA. We're also live streaming today's discussion, so a very warm welcome to all of you who are tuning in via YouTube. I now invite Sinead Walsh, who is the Deputy Director General of Irish Aid and the Horn of Africa Director, to offer some words of introduction. Sinead is recently back from a highly successful period as the EU's ambassador to South Sudan, and we're delighted to see her back in Dublin. And Sinead, over to you.
Thank you so much, David, and delighted to see you and also to see Special Envoy Parfait. In preparation for today, I was actually trying to remember, Parfait, whether the last time we met was in Kenya when they were working on the South Sudan peace process there in 2019, or whether it was when you came to Juba for the Sudan peace talks. And as I was trying to figure this out, I realized that it's actually an illustration of how interconnected these conflicts are in the Horn, and all of these political issues are in the Horn. That there is so much back and forth. But as David said, just hugely appreciative of the fact that you can make time for us, which even by the Horn's normal standards is an incredibly busy and hectic period. I think, you know, most of our participants today will know that the Horn of Africa is a major priority for the Irish government, has been for many years. I would venture possibly rarely, if ever, as much of a focus as it is today. I think it is well known we will take up our seat on the UN Security Council in January, on the 1st of January at 12 midnight. And we're currently getting ready for this. But maybe what may be less well known is that of all the UN Security Council files, about 70% are Africa. And within that proportion, about 65%, I think, is the Horn of Africa. So really, the Horn of Africa is going to be, I suppose, such a huge part of Ireland's tenure on the Security Council, and we're working day in, day out, my colleagues and I, obviously on Ethiopia, and particularly also on some of the UN Security Council items on Sudan, South Sudan, and Somalia. So I might just briefly touch on what some of our priorities are. You know, I think Ethiopia, one has to start with Ethiopia at the moment. This is actually Ireland's largest bilateral development cooperation program. We've been working there for many years. The situation in Ethiopia is enormously worrying. The possible implications on the country itself and the region, I think, are almost unimaginable, frankly. And there is much we don't know because of the current communications blackout. But I think what we do know is pretty devastating, and you know, the notion of an offensive, a major offensive on the regional capital, Mekelle, is obviously of huge concern. We know over 40,000 refugees have already fled to Sudan, and we're very worried to hear, you know, and Minister Coveney has made a few statements about Ethiopia, including about the ethnic profiling dimension, which is really worrying in Addis Ababa, among other places. So through advocacy, through the minister and his engagements at European and international level, through our embassy in Addis, you know, and you know, we're doing our best to advocate on the situation, and we're also providing humanitarian funding to you know, to the affected regions within Ethiopia, but also to the refugees in East Sudan. And it will probably be, you know, quite a long time before we can kind of step back and take stock of what's in the middle of happening in Ethiopia. But I think, Parfait, it certainly relates, the genesis of the crisis that we're seeing certainly relates to the theme of your talk today on politics and governance in the Horn. And at least in part, I suppose what we're looking at is a conflict around the federalist model, how this relates to ethnicity and these kinds of issues. This then brings me on to Somalia, where we're also seeing tensions around federalism and where that model is under pressure in the lead up to the elections there, and tensions between the federal government and the member states, of course, compounded by the threat of Al-Shabaab. Ireland is in discussions at the moment about taking the role of the chair of the Somalia Sanctions Committee for our term on the Security Council, and we hope to play a role in helping this troubled country move away from conflict. Another troubled country, and one that is very close to my heart, is South Sudan, where I spent most of this year of COVID, and as David said, just finished off my second stint in South Sudan. And I think, you know, another country which is struggling with governance, power sharing, of course, after the 2018 peace agreement being the order of the day at the moment, and certainly a role also played by ethnicity, although I would have certainly observed a lot of politicization of ethnicity. And so sometimes I wonder, you know, how much of the ethnic dynamics that we see are actually stoked by politicians. And then finally, as far as our Security Council agenda is concerned on the Horn, is of course Sudan, and of course there are some you know, real positives here, and Ireland is very keenly supporting the transition. It's fragile. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize and learn from the positives of what's happening in Sudan to date. And I remember very well being in Khartoum for a meeting just before the protest started in December of 2019. And had anyone said to me, you know, in 6 months' time, Bashir will be gone, I literally would have laughed in their faces. I mean, I had no conception that this was possible after 30 years. So change is possible. Change is possible in the Horn. People power has really proved to be powerful. And Ireland would certainly like to support that kind of peaceful and democratic change elsewhere in the Horn, where opportunities present. So Parfait, Special Envoy, you have such a wide and deep experience at the UN and in Africa. So I really couldn't think of a better person to come in and advise us at this time as we take our Security Council seat. And that allows us, obviously, as Ireland, to tackle these Horn issues from a different vantage point. So really, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, and a big thanks to IIEA for putting all this together.
Thank you very much, Sinead. And with that, Parfait, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sinead, for this brilliant introduction. I think the difference between you and I is that you'll be sitting in the Security Council and dealing with all of this on a daily basis. And I'm rather happy that the topic of the day will allow me to discuss more broadly issues, not really dwell into specifics. And having said this, I would like to thank the Institute of International and European Affairs for your kind invitation to speak at this prestigious institute. Your warm welcome and generous introduction, give me lots of course, pleasure and to be with you today. And I hope to contribute to your institution's well-established tradition of advancing the global policy discourse on the key challenges affecting our world and ultimately the lives of people around the planet. Incidentally, today's event coincides with the commemoration of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Sadly, a silent pandemic of violence against women and girls is causing unacceptable pain under the shadow of the global coronavirus pandemic. And it is appalling to know that such a violence takes place primarily in the family. Let's pay tribute to the millions of brave women and girls and men who are breaking the silence to fight this awful scourge. Being virtually with you in Ireland reminds me of one of the torchbearers of this fight against violence, on violence against women, whom I had, such as the former president of Ireland, President Mary Robinson, whom I had the rare opportunity to work with and learn from in our common passion for world peace, particularly in Africa. As the first UN Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region of Africa, she dedicated a lot of her work and energy, and I will never forget President Robinson's unwavering commitment to consolidate peace and stability in that conflict-ridden region, with a special emphasis on the role of women in peace and security. In one of her many visits to the countries of the region, I had the privilege of accompanying her to Kirundo in the northern part of Burundi, where she was due to meet with the late President Nkurunziza. We reached that remote city located in a luxuriant hilly bush after riding a noisy helicopter for 45 minutes. The president was upbeat and determined to rally strong political support for the implementation of the peace agreement, the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework Agreement for the DRC and the region, a document she rightfully labeled the Last Chance Agreement. I was deeply impressed by her stamina and inspired by her clear vision of the prospects for lasting regional peace and stability. On our way back to the capital city of Bujumbura, I couldn't resist but to ask her what the source of her faith in the cause of peace was. After a little pause, she replied in her thoughtful and elegant voice by modestly quoting another iconic personality, her friend, Reverend Desmond Tutu of South Africa, who once said that he considered himself a prisoner of hope. I have since kept these few words as a mantra, especially during challenging times, as the ones we are currently facing. I hope that our discussion today will be both meaningful and fitting to the extraordinary circumstances the Horn of Africa region and more broadly our world is going through. I am grateful for your interest in the fate of the people of the Horn of Africa, a region that is home to approximately 280 million people if you count the Horn as encompassing all IGAD member states, and a vast majority of whom are young, a region that is going through profound and multifaceted transition processes. And Syned, you just referred to some of these issues that will be before you in the Council. They are all in search of greater stability, economic prosperity, and regional integration. A region that is struggling to free itself from the shackles of decades of conflict, extreme poverty, and dictatorial rule. Before I begin addressing the current political situation in the Horn of Africa against the backdrop of the novel coronavirus global pandemic, also known as COVID-19, I would like to begin by asking you a question. How many of you have heard of the name Loal Mayen? And it brings you back home, Sinead, in South Sudan. Loal was born in Wharton, South Sudan, and lost members of his family whilst making the perilous trek from South Sudan to a refugee camp in northern Uganda. Today, this resilient young man is a successful video game developer residing in the United States, leading his own company and using the experiences from his past to inform his products. Games aim at peace building and conflict resolution. His inspirational story should keep us all hopeful that a different world is always possible, and that when given the opportunity, African youth and young people in general can do wonders. Loal's story is especially important during difficult times when it feels as though everything is falling apart during times like these ones. Chairperson, distinguished guests, our world is facing daunting challenges and harrowing disparities that continue to plague humanity. COVID-19 has further exposed discrepancies and magnified inequalities worldwide, and it is often sadly the case, those at the bottom continue to bear the brunt, while COVID does not discriminate against the have and have not, nor borders, nationalities, ethnicities, or religious beliefs. It is a fact that those more fortunate have been able to shield themselves better. Prior to COVID-19, our world was already exposed to multiple threats and crises. If we take poverty alone, daily scores of human beings are silently being killed by hunger around the world. However, this uncomfortable reality is often ignored in headlines. We know that things could be better, things could be different. And if anything, COVID-19 has taught us that we can no longer hide behind our false securities. Indeed, most crises the world faces today don't respect borders. We do have a choice. We can choose to draw lessons from this pandemic and reverse course, or choose to keep burying our heads in fictional comfort zones and face consequences of catastrophic proportions for us all, sooner or later. In the Horn of Africa, against the most pessimistic projections, and to our surprise and relief, the world's health impacts seems to have been mitigated, at least for now. COVID-19 remains a slow-moving threat that requires continuous vigilance and engagement in a region already battling numerous threats and structural deficiencies. In the interim, it appears that the proactive prevention measures applied region-wide have succeeded in protecting people from COVID-19's most immediate devastating health consequences. And fears of or out havoc. Given the region's weak health systems, this is indeed good news. However, while numbers are relatively low, the picture may be blurred due to the lack of reliable data. This pandemic is compounding pre-existing challenges and will have serious and long-term socioeconomic implications, making it ever harder for countries in the region to achieve pre-pandemic objectives and the Sustainable Development Goals, a theme on which the chair, David, you've been working very substantively. As we speak, a new wave of desert locust invasion, the worst indicates, is ruining months of hard work and endangering the lives of millions of people across the Horn of Africa. While we all agree that development is first and foremost a responsibility of each government, the fact is all nations are not equally equipped to address and meet the basic needs of their populations. There are, of course, historical reasons for this. Most of the countries in the Horn of Africa region are relatively new nations with a weak or non-existing social contract. Even in older nations, state formation is still underway, and efforts to construct a common narrative remain precarious, given the very fragmented and predominantly identity-based nature of their polity. And Sinead, you refer to that. Those of you who have been following political developments in the Horn know that COVID-19 has had a direct bearing on a few electoral processes, including in Ethiopia. Decisions on postponing or proceeding with elections have raised complicated political, legal, human rights, and public health challenges in several countries. The consequences have not been the same in all the countries, and a major difference is in their ability or lack of it to find a common ground, ideally through consensus building, as they navigate this difficult transition context. However, not many countries in the region have a long-established democratic culture. Conversely, many countries have a strong authoritarian past and are accustomed to a model of government that is based on or has legitimized identity politics, including, of course, ethnicity. It will therefore not be easy for most countries to leapfrog and transition to transform deep-rooted mindsets in exclusive politics. So overcoming these challenges and these fragilities will require both visionary leadership and political will, as well as continuous grassroots engagement. In polarized societies, as you are very familiar with, where identities are politicized, COVID-19 has reinforced tendencies to further shrink political space and derail democratic processes. Identity politics bluntly appeal to emotions rather than to any organizing principle or shared transformative narrative that could help fragmented societies build inclusivity and achieve greater unity and social cohesion. And this is not specific to Africa. People often respond to identity politics because they feel recognized and safer within their groupings, particularly in the absence of real alternatives due to failed state-level governance. I share the Mo Ibrahim Foundation's definition of governance, which should be, quote, more than transparency and democracy, the ability of states to properly deliver to its citizens all the political, social, economic, and environmental public goods and services that any 21st century citizen has the right to expect, unquote. Two important dimensions are implied in the above definition. Firstly, that successful governance performance cannot be delivered in a vacuum, but is reflective of the political, financial, economic, and environmental constraints inherent to our globalized world. And secondly, that governance processes should not be identity-based, and policies should be built on just and fair distribution of services, regardless of identity or political allegiance. I know this is easy said and done, and we often tend to downplay the many pressure points affecting political decisions in countries in transition. Let's not, for example, forget that war was part of a ruthless history in Europe, and that it took centuries to forge more coherent and rule-based societies. This, of course, should be no excuse for any state in the Horn of Africa or continent-wide for not building more peaceful and inclusive nations. Chairperson, while there have been commendable overall governance gains in Africa in recent years, mainly due to improvements of economic opportunities and human development, the 2020 Ibrahim Index of African governance notes that these gains are threatened by, quote, an increasingly precarious security situation and concerning erosion in rights as well as civic and democratic space, unquote. Though the path to nation building is not easy, the trajectory is slowly changing. And we are seeing communities across the continent increasingly demanding for results, effective governance, and accountability. We saw this last year in the historical revolution in Sudan, you just referred to, which was led by outstanding young people, and especially courageous and exemplary women aspiring to bring about a better future for themselves and their country. While applauding these bold steps, the path to stable political transformation and more democratic societies will remain pretty rocky. Admittedly, much more will be needed to fulfill the stated commitment of African states to silencing the guns and build a future that materializes the vision of a peaceful and prosperous Africa contained in the AU's Agenda 2063. Though there is no one size fits all, and there are different national narratives and processes underway, it is undeniable that in today's Africa, people and especially civil society organizations are galvanized. Most people in the region are strongly convinced that they deserve better and are addressing the legitimate aspirations for more decent lives and a better future. Several governments are also seizing this momentous development. These admirable efforts will, however, remain constrained if they are not made at the international level with a real commitment to addressing global challenges and imbalances through a more effective multilateralism. Chair, I'm asking if, as we look at things together, isn't it unsettling that 20 years in this 21st century, we are still globally reproducing the partners of the 16th century triangular trade system, which dedicated specific roles to regions, to different regions. As the value chain is determined in industrial nations, developing countries were and still are seen as a source of raw materials processed in industrial nations, leaving behind a heavy carbon footprint. Consumable goods are dedicated to select nations, and low-end products are sent back to these developing nations, which are not equipped to recycle. I know this may be oversimplified, but the end result of this antiquated and destructive cycle is that countries, including those in the Horn of Africa, which are the least responsible for global warming, are adversely the most impacted by and least equipped to deal with climate change and related environment degradation. Growing water scarcity and desertification are aggravating food insecurity. On the other hand, changing migration patterns are exacerbating existing transboundary conflicts and jeopardizing stability in the region. I have come to you today, Chair, not as an expert, but as someone who has had the privilege of traveling around our beautiful planet. I have grown deeply convinced of the complexity and interconnectedness of things and realities we may, at first glance, think as far apart. This has led me to think about the problems we face, not in silos, but rather in holistic terms. How then can we pretend to understand the Horn of Africa, the topic of our discussion today, without looking at the regions and, more broadly, the continent's historical, political, and economic relationship with the rest of the world, particularly with Europe? The global coronavirus pandemic we are still grappling with has exposed bare the source of our deeply troubled world. Inequalities within and between countries have reached unsustainable levels. We knew before COVID-19 that things weren't going well. We knew that millions around the world were going to bed hungry every night in total indifference. We knew that millions of children didn't have access to school, and that every day the digital divide was widening, leaving millions more in total darkness. Yet, we have largely remained deaf to the plight of many more millions wandering in the wilderness or drowned in the womb of roaring seas in the desperate quest for a decent life. Instead, walls of all sorts are being erected. But once the cup overflows, I'm afraid, walls of privilege may be smashed by fits of despair. Over the past few months, we have been reminded of the fragility of our four securities. Many of us have grown worried and unsettled by the outbursts of our cozy bubbles. Yet, there is little evidence that we will put our best energies, knowledge, technological advances, and financial assets to invest in more inclusive societies rather than stubbornly attempting to fill in the gaps of our decaying vessel. Hesitations to fully embrace UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' call to ensure that any COVID-19 vaccine is made available to people around the world as a global common good is, in this regard, quite revealing. Chair, let me repeat it. Governance in the Horn of Africa cannot be fully understood and fixed without addressing the systemic imbalances and biases of our world. The prevailing global international system is unsustainable. Its nefarious effects are detrimental to most countries, people, and the planet. We know today that economic growth at all costs, as the key indicator of progress, puts profit before people and business before the planet. While acknowledging the commendable steps being implemented to reverse course and limit global warming to pre-industrial levels, including through the modest yet commendable Paris Agreement, the fact is we are lagging and dangerously close to missing the target as we are from the brink. We are not prepared to what is to come, and there will be no new Noah's Ark and no Planet B either. In the Horn of Africa, and more broadly in developing countries, the byproduct of the economic growth race has meant resorting to borrowing massive amounts of money, leading to unbearable levels of public and private debts. This has also meant more dependency as creditors and multinational corporations have taken advantage of these circumstances to acquire natural resources at cheap cost and other concessions, including through corrupt practices. As the global community finds itself in a protracted economic recession, and countries in the Horn are struggling to cope with the multifaceted consequences and long-term detrimental effects of COVID-19, we should ask ourselves if we want to continue protecting a fundamentally unbalanced system that entrenches inequalities within and between countries and continents, and endangers our very planet. Beyond acknowledging that climate change poses an existential challenge to humanity, why are we still investing so much capital in salvaging a system that is so harmful? Those are some of the questions that I'm asking myself. Encouraging measures and innovative propositions towards what is called a third industrial revolution are being developed. Their proponents rightly call for divesting in the fossil fuels and investing in renewable energy and business models that will help achieve a zero carbon future. We applaud this indispensable energy transition and its pace must be accelerated. Yet, let's ensure the new promised land does not repeat past mistakes, placing the economy and profit before people and justice. Similarly, we should remain concerned that in the fast evolving digital economy, fueled by massive personal data, the majority of people get excluded from the very lucrative gains. Here, you may recall the thought-provoking statement delivered in this very forum on June 10th by the President of Ireland, His Excellency Michael Higgins, on the theme Europe and Africa towards a new relationship. I could have simply quoted his entire address today to acknowledge its boldness and reaffirmation of African agency, the notion of African agency so brilliantly articulated by my brother and friend, Professor Carlos Lopez. Among the many refreshing points made by President Higgins, one particularly struck my attention when he argues that, and I quote, an overall commitment to good governance and state well-being is needed in many African states as a prerequisite, but this cannot be used as an excuse for shirking Europe's moral and ethical obligation to progressing and being partners in Africa's overdue economic and wider social transformation, unquote. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the government of Ireland for its outstanding campaign and successful election as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. Ireland's success can be attributed to its clear rejection of the imbalances that are governing our world today. Many African countries saw in the Irish government's message a strong call for a fairer world. This must also be true in the global political governance architecture. The 75-year-old multilateral order inherited from World War II maintains certain countries as second-class nations, and notably no African country is today a permanent member of the Security Council. Sinead, you again said it, matters pertaining to Africa dominate the Security Council's agenda. This, we all agree, must change. From January 2021, one country of the Horn of Africa, Kenya, will join two other African countries to serve for 2 years alongside Ireland as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. Yet, at least 3 countries of the Horn of Africa will feature on the agenda of the Security Council, probably the highest number for any regional group, any other regional group. Our world continues to suffer from an anachronic colonial legacy and tenacious patronizing mindset that permeates almost all aspects of our contemporary world. This also must change. Last week, encouragingly, at the G20 summit in Riyadh, leaders of the world's 20 biggest economies said they were determined to support African countries in overcoming the coronavirus crisis, including by exploring more sustainable financing options. As Secretary General Guterres remarked at the summit, our greatest defense against COVID-19, he said, is solidarity and cooperation. I echo his closing remarks in Riyadh, quote, we can only get there together, committed to an inclusive multilateralism based on international law and the values of the UN Charter, unquote. Chairperson, the countries of the Horn of Africa have already traveled many decades and achieved substantial progress given their tormented state formation history and enduring sociological burdens. In fact, we must be appreciative of the remarkable strides they have made against all odds in a relatively short lifespan. Yet, the way home is still a long one, and it is paved with daunting and deeply rooted but not insurpassable challenges. They will better succeed by joining hands and strengthening regional cooperation and partnerships, including by optimizing the promises of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Living in peace and stability in diverse societies is possible if a deliberate and intelligent choice for respect for the rule of law and consensus building is made. Not once, but all the time, in times of peace, and even more so during crisis. And through that process, lay the ground for institutions that promote justice and fairness, not as a reflection of the prevailing balance of power, because this can change over time, but as an expression of the inherent equality of all their citizens, regardless of status, power, or population size. These should serve as the foundation of an inclusive social contract and be reflected in constitutional and legal systems. But as desirable and indispensable as they may be, strong institutions with built-in check and balance mechanisms cannot be transformative on their own. They require both principled political leaders, particularly in relatively new democratic systems, as well as vigilant and engaged civil society organizations and citizens. And this, in turn, implies the enjoyment of all political freedoms and rights. In fact, the credibility of any such compact should be judged against its ability to protect the weakest groups in any society. Admittedly, very few nations have passed that test, considering the largely devastating impact of COVID-19 on poorer groups the world over. Chairperson, we are past the ticking clock scenario. The alarm bell has rung and abruptly woken us up. We must stop playing lip service and take the bull by the horns. The youth everywhere is rightly impatient and is telling us that the prevailing system is no longer acceptable. We need to listen to young people like valiant Greta from Sweden and take collective action. Closer to us, my dear friend and young sister, Haya Shebi, the AU's Youth Special Envoy, has also been beating the drum of change, and we must act now. Multilateralism, which has suffered a great deal, must be revitalized. Corporations, which enjoy tax havens and astronomical profits from a financial system that is detached from a shocked global economy, need to be scrutinized and required to play their part. Our world should not be driven by economic gains only, but a higher sense of solidarity and shared responsibility. Aiming for profit alone leads to mayhem, and in the long term is self-defeating. Chairperson, I'm talking about fairness, not charity. I am talking about a global economic system that pays a fair price to farmers in developing countries, allows communities and societies to create wealth and break the degrading cycle of extreme poverty, while protecting the environment, including through climate justice and adequate mitigation and adaptation support programs. This is quintessential to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including its goal 16 to promote justice and strong institutions with a view to advancing more peaceful and inclusive societies in the Horn of Africa. It is achievable, but not without effective solidarity, underpinned by a shared vision and faith in humanity's common destiny. Faith in a world where women and girls can freely prosper to their fullest potential. Chairperson, the challenges of our time require a new state of consciousness that is still sorely lacking. Even as the promise of effective vaccines against COVID-19 represent an immense relief, provided they are made available to all. Moving forward, let's hope that the realization of the existential challenges we collectively face will force us to act purposefully and swiftly. The poignant appeal of Pope Francis in his most recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, provide us a glimpse of the immense possibilities from which short-term gains still prevent us from fully embracing the rich promises. We must display solidarity, and in the words of the late Martin Luther King, Jr., we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. Yes, things may be falling apart, but I'm sure, Chair, hope will endure. And I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Parfait. That was a very powerful presentation, and you covered many, many important themes. I think you raised profound and troubling questions about the difficult path that countries in the Horn of Africa have to follow in order to build peace and to create a sustainable economic order, and one which is equitable and which respects basic rights. You covered a multitude of themes, and thank you very, very much for that. We can I also say in passing that we very much agree with one point you made about the need for greater African representation on the Security Council. It's one that Ireland has been quite strong on. But we have a short number of minutes left in which we can take some questions from the audience, if you were good enough to answer them, Parfait. I mean, there are quite a lot which have come in. One which I will begin with relates to the limited success of the ICC in pursuing accountability in Africa, and the impact that this has obviously on the search for peace and reconciliation. How do you view the prospects for international efforts at achieving accountability in the region? Could I add in also another question just for myself on how you see the role of the UN in potentially helping to bring about a cessation of hostilities in Tigray at the moment? Over to you, Parfait.
Thank you very much. I try to be brief and say that concern for international justice and accountability are indeed major, are critically important for, I think, for the communities, for the African people themselves. And we can see it, people more and more are demanding for this accountability. And as regard the ICC, we must be fair to say that most of the cases in the ICC are African cases, and most of them were indeed at the request of African states themselves. So it may not be totally accurate to suggest that ICC has failed in Africa. On the contrary, there was a greater concern in the sense that the institution was maybe a bit unbalanced, and that there was a too much focus on Africa alone. But at the end of the day, I do believe that these are issues that are extremely vital. They will define, of course, the future of stability and prosperity in Africa. And African countries, I think, are taking this very seriously. And I do hope that this trend, even though I just stated that there was a risk to see a kind of governance and rule of law scaling back, retreating. But in the end, I'm absolutely confident that the demands we are seeing will ensure that justice indeed will remain a major common good for the people of the continent. And the UN remains absolutely engaged. As we speak, the most important concern is indeed to providing as much as possible humanitarian support to all those who may be affected by this by the ongoing conflict. And we are doing this. The whole country team in the country is working very closely with the national authorities, with the government, and we can simply say that this is a commitment which will continue to occupy all of us. You have seen the many calls of the Secretary General to ensure that there is unimpeded humanitarian access and protection is provided to both the civilian affected, but also humanitarian workers who are sacrificing so much to provide to meet the needs of those people in danger. So we will continue to do this. We are not doing it only here, but some of those who have already fled the country on the other side and found themselves in Sudan are also, of course, provided with as much assistance as possible. And as I said, we are partnering with the government in providing these important and vital services to the people.
Thank you very much, Parfait. Turning specifically to Somalia as one of the countries for which you have responsibility, one member of our audience who has lived there raises the deeply rooted nature of corruption in Somalia. Somalia was first in Transparency International's corruption index for 12 consecutive years. How do you think we can address such entrenched issues of corruption?
Well, I mean, corruption is not something that the UN condones, and I very frankly don't think that there is any responsible authority in any country who should be condoning corruption. Corruption has a cost. It costs lives. It diverts very scarce resources from their main use, that is to meet the needs of people who are really struggling. Corruption divert vital, medical, education, very scarce resources that really are in need in countries like Somalia, and therefore it's definitely not something that should be condoned. And we are, of course, in a country like Somalia, the priority remains, of course, in addressing insecurity and stability. And my colleagues who are on the ground are, working day in, day out with the entire international community present in Somalia with the government to ensure that these challenges can be overcome. But this is not going to happen overnight. I realize that we have so much parallel criminality that is ongoing. Simply addressing the threats that Al-Shabaab poses and its own criminal organization is all encompassing challenges that, of course, can only be fully addressed if Somalia achieve a state of stability and security that will reestablish the rule of law and make it possible to build, reliable and accountable institutions. So it's a long way. to get there, and we can already be all pleased that steps towards organizing the next elections are underway, and hopefully this would be also an important building block into precisely achieving a more stable and secure country.
Many thanks, Parfait. You spoke very eloquently about the Sustainable Development Goals and the fundamental developmental needs in the region. Obviously, the pandemic has slowed things down in the short term. There are immediate concerns around food security and extreme poverty, which COVID-19 has exacerbated. But one member of our audience asks whether there are concrete steps which you think could be taken to promote and serve the SDGs implementation in the context of recovery from the pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we said it even in the pre-COVID phase. The Secretary General was already pulling the alarm bell and telling and the Deputy Secretary General, they both were already telling the world that beware, we may be going off track and we may not be able to achieve the SDGs. And so this was before the pandemic. And today we know that the whole world will be entering into a recession. So we applaud the recent decisions of the G20 to ensure that they can pull together and provide the resources that would make it possible for us all to be better and stronger in the post-COVID-19 era. And it's very encouraging to see that, for example, for the service of the debt, for the debt service, there was a decision to postpone, to extend the period of freezing the paying the service of the debt service, which of course is not the best outcome. Let's be blunt about it, as we do believe that more should be done, including into totally canceling this debt. And if we look at the conditions in which those countries got in so much burden. But this already in itself is something. Those resources would have to be repurposed, not to pay the service. I mean, it's absolutely appalling to see that some countries are putting more money, more of their very limited resources into paying, repaying their debt than in investing in schools, in health services, and creating decent jobs. So we believe that it cannot be done. These countries will not be able to do it on their own. And this is where we say that one thing is indeed to address the core issue, I mean, the whole issue of debt relief, but also moving forward, I mean, we have to put in place global trade that is fairer. As I said, we need to ensure that we are not asking for charity, but that, farmers are given their fair share, that natural resources are not, get acquired for nearly nothing, or in-kind repayment for any debt. Things of this kind have to be addressed, and more broadly, we have to put an end to the kind of carbon-intensive economy model that we have at the moment. This kind of global trade, I mean, itself 90% of global warming and carbon dioxide comes from this intensive trade, maritime trade. So we should do something to put an end to this. Investment must take place where the goods, natural raw material exists, and this can be done, by ensuring that investments are protected. We can all work together with those countries to ensure that legal systems are put in place to protect investment that may be coming from outside. But if this is done, jobs will be created, will be absolutely limiting the carbon footprint involved in this intensive trade, and we'll be creating new jobs for the youngsters in these countries, keep them at home, and ensure that they can hope for a better future. What is happening today is simply unsustainable.
Parfait, thank you very much of that. We've unfortunately come to the end of the time for this event, but I have to say you ended on a very important note, which you struck several times during your presentation, namely the importance of youth for implementing the SDGs, but for also achieving many of the goals of peace, justice, and equity in the Horn of Africa. Thank you very much for taking time to speak to the Institute and to its audience today. We were delighted to have you, Parfait. We wish you every success in your ongoing work, particularly with current challenges. I'm sorry that we haven't had more time to reach more questions. There were many of them, but thank you to everybody who listened today, and most of all, thank you, Parfait.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. Bye, David.